Welcome everybody back to the Halloween Spooktacular. Yeah, that's right. Spooky Bigfoot stories are in store for us tonight. I've unveiled five, that's right, five of the scariest Bigfoot stories in the vault. And we're going to bring them to you live right here tonight on the Halloween Spooktacular with the Squatchers Lounge podcast. Hopefully he chills out in just a little bit. All right, that's right, everybody. I am your host of this mess, the Reverend Jeff Kelly, and we are live with the Squatchers Lounge podcast from the new SLP headquarters. That's right. Undisclosed locations. We're not giving away quite yet where we are. As you can see in the background there, that's Halloween painting number 3. And getting a little bit better. The skills are getting a little bit better. And yeah, it is a plumpkin. Not to be confused with a blumpkin. That's right here on the Squatchers Lounge podcast. I'm going to make you look up what a blumpkin is, and you probably shouldn't do it with your kids around. All right, so into the night we go. We are talking Bigfoot stories tonight, scary ones, some of my favorites. We also have a quasi-rewind that's Halloween appropriate, and a camping tips for stupids flashback. So it's going to be a spooktacular evening. That's right. Now let's start out with one of my absolute favorite Bigfoot stories of all time. That's right. And let's go ahead. We'll kick right on into this. Now, this is one of those stories that you really hope is true, as it makes Bigfoot seem just a little bit too much like us. But Richie and his kids, Betty and Bruce, were on Christmas vacation near Hilt, California, and the Klamath National Forest when they had a snowy encounter unlike anything they had ever seen before. This is their story. Well, let's see here. I had picked up Bruce and Betty from their mom's house the year for Christmas vacation. Finally, I'd gotten to take them with me to the mountains for snow and sledding and all kinds of fun. Bruce, being the oldest, had his nose buried in his phone, but Betty was turning 11 in January and was bouncing off the walls with anticipation. Question after question, like a machine gun. Is there snow yet? Yes. How much snow is there? I don't know. When will it start snowing? Today. What time today? Later on today. Let's hope we get there before it gets bad. How cold will it be? Cold. It went on like for what seemed like hours until we finally reached the cabin. It was anything but too fancy, but it was set off all by itself. I'd found it on Craigslist really cheap, and I was surprised to not only find electricity, but 4G internet and a flushing toilet. Okay, there had to be something wrong with this place. The owner said that there were instructions on what to avoid in the area in a book on the coffee table, and sure enough, there it was. Now, Bruce had picked up the book and started reading it and started to laugh. He says, "Dad, you're not going to believe, but these people in this book swear they see Bigfoot up here, and they get watched while outside. There's no way that's true, right?" Well, I asked to see the book, and I flipped to the front of it and began to read. It says, if you're reading these instructions, it's already too late, so just follow the rules and no one will get hurt. It read like a ransom note from the Unabomber almost. The biggest rule is don't let food outside in any way at night. Not in your car, not on the tables, not on the porch. All food should be put away and stored as to not attract them close to the house. And when you venture outdoors, go in pairs. Never go for walks alone, and never encourage them to come close to you. And finally, if they run off, do not follow or chase them. It will not end well for you. If you follow these simple rules, you and they will have a wonderful adventure together. Well, I read on in the back where visitors to the cabin had made their own entries. One read, Mary S. Lincoln, Illinois. The big red one came close today. He seemed to be watching me as I washed the dishes in the creek. Later that evening, we could hear in the same spot I'd cleaned it up. I hope they fix the water soon. Another read, Billy G, something must be wrong. Tim has not come back from his hike, and I told him not to go alone, but he didn't listen. Now they are screaming outside. Myron H. from Bedford, PA. I saw a group of them today in a meadow as I was out on the walk with the wife. I think they were digging for something to eat as the dirt was flying up from all of them. The moment that they noticed us, they ran off. Just then, a loud thump came from outside. We dropped everything as Betty was trying to get her sled off the car alone. It slipped and fell off, knocking her down. She wasn't hurt, no harm, no foul, so we picked up and we made our way back inside. Now, it started to snow outside, and it was a good thing as it was pretty bare on the hills around the cabin. But the forecast was for a fresh 8 to 12 inches overnight, so there should be tons of playing in the morning. We set up our beds for the night. Bruce had the fire just roaring and sending selfies to friends from his phone. The snow was really falling outside, and we sat by the window watching it drop. Finally, it was off to bed about 10 p.m. Sometime during the night, it got really cold outside. I got up to use the bathroom, so I stoked up the wood-burning stove and really got it hot again. I saw something moving out the front window, so I sat down to watch, but it was so far out there that it just seemed like a shadow, so I finally went back to bed. Morning came fast, and Betty was soon jumping on my cot, yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, it's time to go sledding. Get up, let's go." And she ran out to the big room. All of the sleeping rooms led to the big room, and the kitchen and the living kind of all together. We fed the wood stove and ate a few donuts and headed out for some sledding and tubing. Right out the back of the cabin was a hill, and it led to a great sledding drop-off just 40 yards from the cabin. We pushed our way through what was nearly 16 inches of fresh powder, and it was wet and frozen, which should make it really fast. Bruce went down the hill on his tractor tube first, and it bounced in a few places, but made a great track for the metal sleds to go after. I had waxed those things up, so it should be slick and fast, and Betty was a pro. This wasn't her first time on this thing. She hopped on and pushed off and flew right down the hill, cutting a path right to the bottom, then rolling off before she hit some trees. Amazing fun for hours. Up and down the hill the kids went. I even took a time or two myself, and by the end of the morning, the entire hill was like ice, and the kids were flying to the bottom. It was on my last ride down that I had noticed the tracks. Just as I had picked up the tube to walk back up the snow steps we had carved on the side of the hill, I noticed a set of footprints that led right up to the tree, then trailed off the other side like something had stopped in and watched us playing in the snow. I didn't want to scare the kids, but these tracks were huge, nearly 1/3 longer and 1/4 wider than my own snow boot, and they looked like a man with no shoes on. Was someone playing a trick on us? Either way, it was time to go, so Betty came down the hill for one last time, and Bruce yelled he was going back to the cabin. But I remembered what the book said, so I yelled back for him to wait for us, and he did. On the way back to the cabin, we heard what sounded like a giggling right in the woods behind us. All of us turned at the exact same time and went, "What was that?" Then everything went silent again, and we made our way back inside. We were all cold and really worn out from sledding, and it seemed like food and a nap was next on the list. I made up some chowder on the wood stove and some hot chocolate for the milk to do the trick. 45 minutes later, we were all out snoring away. I awoke to the kids yelling at each other as usual. It was nearly dark outside, and Betty swore Bruce had hid her sled because it was gone, and the tracks led to the woods and back. Well, Bruce and I went out and noticed that the tracks didn't lead away. They went from the woods and back to the woods. Someone or something had taken Betty's sled, but it was far too dark now to go into the woods, so we figured we would track it down in the morning. Well, the next morning, Betty again was up at the sun and now demanded we go look for her sled, as she put it, track down the sorry SOB that stole my ride. So off the three of us went up the hill to the sledding hill, and sure enough, there was her sled at the bottom of the hill. Bruce put her on his lap, and they rode down to the bottom of the hill, and quickly Betty dragged her sled back to the top, complaining that it stinks like a dirty bear. Sure enough, here and there were long, dark hairs stuck in the screws on the runners of the sled. It even looked like there was a little blood on one of the corners. It didn't seem to be too worse for wear, so down the hill the kids went again as I stood watch at the top for visitors. Off and on, after a couple of breaks, the kids were finally ready to go get warmed up. And again, as we walked to the cabin, we heard noises as if somebody was following us back in the woods that we just couldn't see. It would wait for us to almost get out of sight and then move up a few trees to keep us in sight again and again. That went on until we reached the cabin. Strange to say the least. This time, we put Betty's sled right against the side of the house by the window so she could see it. Let me get this right. I eyeballed the stealing sucker that took her sled face to face, so she moved her cot out there for the night and set up surveillance on it. We all ate a nice stew and settled in to watch the snowfall for the night, and we were expecting up to 2 more feet. Well, it must have been midnight when I was awoken by screams of "Daddy! Monsters!" from poor Betty out the window. Well, I jumped to my feet and I rushed out to catch her as she ran to me, telling me she saw monsters, big, hairy, monkey monster like Bigfoot. Well, we've all seen Finding Bigfoot, and she knew that they could be, but how could she see anything out there? I couldn't see 2 feet out the window. So she said they were right out the window looking at me. When I put on my boots and I grabbed the flashlight while Bruce had gotten dressed, we ventured out into the snow. And sure enough, tracks led right up to the front window, and there were even handprints on the window where they had been looking in. And sure enough, Betty's sled was gone once more. She was furious that her sled was gone, and now we were positive that it was Bigfoot that had taken it, making more sense as to why it smelled like a stinky bear. Could it be that they were riding it down the hill at night? Well, we all put our cots together and managed to drift off to sleep again. Morning came all too fast, and we all got up and ate. We let the sun really get up in the sky, and we dressed up to see if we could find the sled in the same place we had found it the day before. Sure enough, after that hike, we looked down the hill, and the sled is in the tree line at the bottom. Well, the kids rode the tube down the hill, but they waved me down instead of coming back up with it. When I got to the bottom, I find the kids staring at the sled. It's broken into pieces. You could plainly see where something very heavy had carved a path from the top of the hill, directly impacting the tree that destroyed the sled. Tufts of hair stuck in the boards and the runners, bent from the impact, and a blood trail, an ugly trackway leading off into the woods. We tracked the blood in as far as we dared, but Betty, being the smartest of us all, wanted to go back to the cabin and forget the blood and the sled and kind of just go home. It kind of felt like the trip was over. So we gathered up our things and we began to load the cars. The day's sun had melted much of the snow and the trail out was clear enough, so home we would head, maybe rent some movies and eat pizza, but enough with the scary, hairy monsters, Betty said, and we both agreed. It was starting to get dark, and we loaded the last of our things into the car, started out the drive when Bruce said, "Hey, stop a minute." He got out of the car. He cut the snow tube off of the roof, and he left it behind in the wood line, then got back into the car. He looked at Betty and said, "At least the one that hurt them, at least this one won't hurt them." And they both giggled as we pulled out onto the road. Many people have asked him if they would go back to that cabin, but he's said that he was never able to actually find it again. For some reason, the number didn't store in his phone, and he never saw the Craigslist ad again. See, this is one of my favorites. I'm going to eyeball that stinking, slimy, stealing sucking it. That's my ride. That's right. Little Betty was a badass. Can you imagine the Bigfoot riding the sled down the hill? I think I can actually see that. All right, so let's check out story number 2. Now, story number 2. Let's see here. Oh, this is a very strange one as well. Sometimes an encounter with Bigfoot's an amazing, and yet other times it scares people nearly to death. Well, this story is one of the latter, and frankly, it gives me the creeps. Pardon me while I wet my whistle. Now, Steve and Jerry wanted to go camping for a week near Yosemite National Park, and they wanted to go backpacking and hiking the trails. Seemed like a fun adventure for the summer, but things went a bit off track. Let's see here. Now, being middle-class kids from north of Las Vegas, Marty and Steve and I decided our summer between high school and college, we would drive over to Yosemite National Forest and camp and hike for 2 weeks before we had to pack up and ship off to college. We had all been together since we were 8. I moved into the neighborhood and met Marty and Steve the first day when I went to class. We were all Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans, so it was destiny that we would be friends forever. Anyhow, we all lived on the same street. I mean, I can't remember a time when one of these two nuts hadn't been by my side for nearly everything worth remembering in my life. But now we were all going to different schools. It kind of sucks growing up, but that's what happens. So this would be that last epic trip that we'd be on for some time. None of us had a car worth of crap, but Steve's dad had gone to California for the summer and mistakenly left his 4x4 Chevy Blazer keys on the rack. So that problem was now solved. We hadn't planned on being back 3 days before him, so it shouldn't be a problem. He never actually said not to use it, so why not? Well, the next morning, we all met at Steve's place and we headed out for our trip. The Blazer had a ton of cargo room, but we had backpacked plenty of times and our gear was pretty small. Food and water took up most of the space. Yosemite to Vegas was a mere 7-hour trip, so 5 a.m. we met up, and by 7, we were gone. Steve had gotten directions to get us into the Ptolemine Grove, and we were to hike into the Hodgen Meadow and back. With plenty of watering holes along the way, we were ready once we arrived and got parked. On the Blazer, we left a note Marty had made. It was all the details of our plans, when we started, how long we planned to be gone, when we intended to return. A tip we learned online. At least someone would be looking for us should we not return. We left the same info with my mom and Marty's aunt. We had all taken plenty of trips together, from desert camping to trips to the Pacific Coast Trail. With Marty's uncle, this should be a chance to use all of our skills together. We got going about 4 p.m, and this being summer, there was plenty of light left, so we headed up the trail to find a good spot to camp for night one. When we managed to get to a spot to camp just before dusk, and just before dark, we were getting a fire going and ready to cook. All of us brought tons of those bag meals, so we heated up some water and chowed down around the flames. Before too long, the stories broke out. Marty started out with the tale of a missing hiker on this trail. For years, there were rumors of some sort of abduction or even alien intervention, but that, of course, had to be all made up. Steve told of a couple camping in the park. They had forgotten to put up their food at night and gotten drunk and sloppy and ended up getting eaten by a bear. But to top them all off, I told tales of the Sasquatch in these mountains. Since there were kids in the desert, till the Bigfoot fascinated us like no other creature. I remembered hearing stories from an old TV show and from as much wildlife and protected lands. There certainly could be something out here. This was how each day came and went for about 4 days. We would cover 6 to 10 miles a day, and it wasn't until we were just a few nights from the trailhead that things began to get very weird. It was Tuesday night, and we were getting pretty low on the food with just a few packs. Each other were slowed down eating, but it wasn't such a good idea, as earlier and earlier we would tire out each day until this day we were beat and only had made it about 6 miles before Marty rolled his ankle, and we had to really slow down again. There was a creek on the map not far from here, so we beat off trail a little bit to come to some cold water on his ankle in hopes that it wouldn't swell up too much. Well, we reached the creek in about an hour, but Marty's ankle was already red and puffy, and he couldn't barely touch it, let alone put any weight on it. So we dropped our packs and got him into the creek to chill the swelling and help with the pain. Steve went back for the packs, and we had a couple of first aid kits in them, and we would have to stabilize his ankle and help him walk out in the morning. It wasn't broken, just really sore, and hopefully a night of dipping in the creek will make it better by morning. We set up a small camp right on the bank of the river, and we got his ankle set away and broke out and ate like pigs. We figured we would fuel up and try to make it all the way out tomorrow. If we started at first light, we would surely make it. Well, we had drifted off to sleep one at a time as we were all exhausted from the day. All of us except Marty, of course. He was in some serious pain. He sat and fed the small fire and took trips to the creek to soak his foot. As he sat in the creek, he heard some animal noises coming his way. Not sure what they were, he sat still, hoping to get a view of some majestic stag or maybe an elk, or if it was a bear, he was screwed. But as luck had it, it was none of those things. Just as his eye focused on the newest sounds, his eyes let him see what he thought for sure never existed: a myth, a legend. Sure enough, a small Bigfoot. It was only 4.5 feet tall, but as the stories say, covered all in hair, long, goofy arms with big, powerful legs, and the face was very manlike. It hadn't seen Marty sitting there, and soon enough, he heard another, deeper call from a similar animal, and the little one ran off. Marty, amazed at what he just saw, scrambled back to camp and woke us all up. He told us about seeing the small Bigfoot and hearing the louder, deeper one, then watching the small one run off. Intrigued by the sighting, Steve and I went down to the creek to have a look around. There was a log down that crossed the creek just yards upstream, so we walked over it and lit up the area where Marty had seen the creature. As we were just about to give up on the search for any signs, Steve found a set of tracks coming in and going out of Marty's view from the creek, about 11 inches long and 6 inches wide. And you could see where it had picked up and run. Then the tracks just stopped in the tree line on the forest floor. So we went back across the creek and we all went back to camp. Well, the rest of the night it was hard to sleep, knowing the Bigfoot not only were real, but they were living right around us. Granted, we were off trail a bit, but only about 3/4 of a mile, not some great distance as I had always figured. No, they seemed to be able to hide right in plain sight. It seemed that though the night we could hear something, sounds in the darkness, and the flash of lights lit up. Well, we searched the area, but we saw nothing the rest of the night. As dawn broke, we ate once again, and leaving just a couple of meals between us, so making the distance would be important. Marty's ankle started out okay, so we packed up and we began to make the trip out. We took as much weight off of Marty's pack as we could. Even at that, we had to stop every couple of miles for a rest. At sunset, once again, we knew staying the night was the only way. Now only some 12 miles from the truck, we should most certainly be out tomorrow. So we set up camp and split up the last meals we had between us and sat around the fire. This had been an epic trip with ups and downs, and at one point, I thought Marty was going to beat Steve to death over who was better, The Rock or Goldberg, but it all worked out okay. Well, just as we had gotten really dark outside, a very strong animal smell came up on the wind. Nothing like we had encountered so far on this trip. Almost like the skunk, but not really, and then it would pass. This happened several times over the course of a couple of hours, and it was odd indeed. Steve had gotten up and gone to the bathroom, and he took his flashlight with him. It wasn't but a few minutes before he came back into camp without a word, kind of shaking and pointing back towards where he came. Finally, after he collected himself, he said one word: Sasquatch. Oh, great. I thought now both of them had seen one, but I had not. Then he said, huge, it's scary. So Marty and I got up and lit up the area, but of course there was nothing to see. Just then we smelled that same odor on the air, but heard no movement. So we again went back into camp. Think of the luck. Both of my best friends get to see 2 different Bigfoot, and maybe I can get lucky yet. Well, as the night went on, we noticed that unlike other nights, there was no moon tonight. It had gotten cloudy, and nearly all the animal sounds had ceased around us. Then, as if on cue, we heard the same sound Marty had heard the first time from the big one. Only this wasn't far off. This seemed to be right near us. Then again, from the other side of camp, another call came from a big one, and then a third, and a fourth, much smaller. We were surrounded for sure. We all stood up, lighting up the area around camp the best we could, and the animals kept moving from tree to tree. They would get out of sight and then make a call, and then moments later they would move again. We couldn't keep track of all of them. Finally, Steve lit up one of the big ones in a full beam of his light, and it looked directly at us. Just as it did, the small one ran up beside it, and they both made a call and then ran off into the night. With that, all the activity stopped. We were very much afraid of these animals. They made it very clear we were intruding on their space. Finally, the sun came up, and we packed up and left the area just as fast as we could. Somehow, Marty's ankle was much better today, and we started hiking out as fast as we could. About 6 hours later, we finally reached the Blazer. All the way home, we talked about what happened. Just who could we trust with this information that won't think that we're nuts? Finally, Marty's other uncle used to talk about Bigfoot. We drive over to his place right away and tell him what happened. Well, Marty called him on the way home, and Bill told us to come right over. He was excited to hear what happened. We all made calls home to alert them that we were fine and we'd be home later. But off to Bill's uncle's it was for just a few more hours. After discussing it with his uncle decided that he agreed that most likely they were nothing more than Bigfoot doing their thing and living their lives. Well, over the next couple of weeks, Steve was kind of like a ghost. His dad had found out we took the Blazer, and that got him in a lot of heat. So he hadn't seen him until his grounding was over. Finally, he came by, but he didn't look good at all. He finally came clean that he hadn't had a good night's sleep since we had gotten back. He told me that when he had seen the big Sasquatch by himself, something happened to him. It wasn't that he had seen it from far off. It came up to him. It knocked him on his back and then stood over him. It growled at him and snorted and drooled that hit him straight in the face. It smacked him around as if to figure out what it was before leaving out with a scream that hurt his chest as it ran off. Now every time he closes his eyes to sleep, all he sees is this monster in his dreams. So no, he hasn't slept much in days. Well, I tried to assure him that we were safe and that eventually those feelings would pass. But again, for more weeks, he declined further and further. Marty and I had to leave for school. It wasn't until Thanksgiving break when we got home that we had learned that Steve had not gone off to school at all. In fact, he wasn't doing very well. My parents didn't want to say anything that would make me distract things from school, but when I went over to see him, his father said it could only be a short visit. Steve was not mentally well these days. He said he had gone downhill right after our trip and the doctors couldn't figure it out. Something at night he sees. He screams out. Well, as I went to see my friend, the first thing I noticed was the medication bottles all over the room. He sat there staring out the window, not moving or talking. As I said hello to him and tried to get him to talk, but he just looked away and back out the window. That's where I left my friend. I returned to school, and before I got back for the summer, Steve had gone into full-time care at the hospital. Marty and I could never really figure it out. Some years after I graduated from college, I heard Steve managed to hang himself in the hospital. His suicide note read one word: Sasquatch. Well, they can't all be winners, and they definitely can't all be happy, sunshine, rainbow Sasquatches. Although this trio thought that they had won the sighting encounter lottery until the scary Bigfoot showed up. Just when you think everything is all Brady Bunch, the real danger is lurking. Yeah, that one's got like 240,000 views on the channel. It is one of the most favoritist of all of the Bigfoot stories that we tell. Okay, let's take a short break here because now let's go ahead and get us in for the quasi theory from a quasi scientist. We'll give my throat a break here for a moment, and we will hear the quasi scientist himself, Mr. Dean Cooper. And now, quasi theories from a quasi scientist with your host, Dean Cooper.
Goblins, their habits and haunts. From Wikipedia, the source we can all quote from and not get sued. A goblin is a monstrous creature from European folklore, first attested in stories from the Middle Ages. They are ascribed various and conflicting abilities, temperaments, and appearances, depending on the story and country of origin. They are almost always small and grotesque, mischievous or outright evil, and greedy, especially for gold and jewelry. They often have magical abilities similar to a fairy or demon. Similar creatures include brownies, dwarves, gnomes, imps, and kobolds. Whoever wrote this obviously had no real experience with goblins. For that, we must go to primary sources. These sources do not include J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien used the term goblin in The Hobbit. He later wished that he used the word orc, which is not the same creature as a goblin. No, we need to go to someone who has accurately described goblin behavior and appearances. That would be James Whitcomb Riley. He's been dead long enough that I may quote him liberally, like unto Wikipedia, with no ensuing legal consequences. So here goes. Little orphan Annies come to our house to stay, and wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away, and shoo the chickens off the porch, and dust the hearth and sweep, and make the fire and bake the bread, and earn her board and keep. And all us other children, when the supper things is done, we sit around the kitchen fire and has the mostest fun, a-listening to the witch tales that Annie tells us about, and the goblins that'll get you if you don't watch out. Once there was a little boy who wouldn't say his prayers, and when he went to bed at night away upstairs, his mammy heard him holler, and his daddy heard him bawl, and when they turned the covers down, he wasn't there at all. And they seeked him in the rafter room and cubby hole and press, and seeked him up the chimbley flue and everywheres, I guess. But all they ever found was his pants and roundabout. And the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. And one time a little girl would always laugh and grin and make fun of everyone, all her blood and kin. And once when there was company and old folks was there, she mocked 'em and shocked 'em and said she didn't care. And just as she kicked her heels and turned to run and hide, there was two great big black things a-standing by her side, and they snatched her through the ceiling, for she knowed what she's about. And the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. And little orphan Annie says when the blaze is blue, and the lamp wick sputters and the wind goes woo, and you hear the crickets quit, and the moon is gray, and the lightning bugs and dew is all squinched away, you better mind your parents and your teachers fond and dear, and cherish them that loves you and dry the orphan's tear, and help the poor and needy ones that clusters all about, or the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. From my own experience, you can catch one in a properly baited snare utilizing locally caught free-range naughty children. They have a nice pelt and they taste like chicken. The goblins, that is. Don't eat the children. You can sell their leftover bits to the wicked witch down the street, thereby destroying the evidence. This has been Dean Cooper, quasi-scientist, enlightening you with my quasi-theory of the week. You may read the text of this on my blog at bydean.com. That's BHAIDIN.com.
Well, there you have it. Bydean.com. That's right. Your quasi theory for the week. Well, not really, but okay. Well, we do have just another exciting piece for you here. That's right. We're going to do a recap of camping tips for stupids. That's right. Tip number 52 coming right up at you. Let me make sure y'all can hear that.
Camping tips for hosers. Tip number 52, eh? So this will be like the Canadian edition, eh? Oh, and it's not like this is being sponsored by any like beer companies, but so like if I figured that if I mention them, they would like maybe send over some free samples, eh? And be like, hey, thanks for like mentioning me, eh? So yeah, here's some beer stuff. So good day, eh? So you're like camping out in the upper Klondike, eh? And you're setting up your campsite, and you got your campfire set up, and you know you got your tent all pitched and stuff. And then when it's all done, like the stupid hoser door is on the wrong side of the damn tent, eh? Because if you're like me, you want the tent facing the campfire, eh? And so it's not. And well, that's like a problem with the manufacturer, eh? It's really hit or miss with tents. They just don't make them like they used to, eh? So one thing I found you can do is like get a knife and make a new door, eh? One that faces a campfire. But then you get the problem of getting rain or snow in your tent, and then you're like, no way. So be careful with the quality of your tents you get, eh? So, like, you got your campsite all set up, eh? But you still need to figure out where to put all that beer, eh? Well, one easy trick is to like just get a beer truck, eh? And just store all the beer in that. Cause, it's like portable that way, eh? And don't worry about like needing one that's refrigerated or nothing. Just leave the back door open, eh? And if any hosers from other campsites come over and try to take some of your beer, just tell them to take off. Just take off. But if they want to store their beer in the truck too, then okay. Okay, so you're out on the river trying to do your fly fishing, eh? And a big hoser moose comes out of the bushes right by you and stares you down, eh? So you're like, what do you do? Well, one trick I learned is that moose are intimidated by anything with bigger antlers than what they got, eh? So one trick I did was like take a Viking helmet, and all I did was just duct tape my snowshoes to it, eh? So they look like big antlers. And so you put that on your head and you look back at the moose, eh? And the moose will see you and be like, no way, and take off. This has been Camping Tips for Hosers. Remember to bring enough beer, eh?
Oh, God bless you. I didn't preview that one at all. Sorry, folks. Camping Tips for Hosers, eh? That's right. The Gone Camping Channel in the mind of Jevin Moore. I don't know if I want to go too deep into the mind of Jevin Moore, but we do anyhow. All right, let's get back to it, folks. Let's time to say hello to everybody in the Hangouts. Looks like we're going to cut us a story or two short tonight. I'm sorry. I thought I was going to be able to get through 5 of them, but apparently not. But we'll do next week the ones we don't get done this week. So let's say hi to everybody out there. Let's see here. We've got Jonathan Doty's in the house. How you doing, sir? Hope you and yours are doing well and feeling well. We've got Squatch Box, and I'm sure Christopher is out there. Yeah, that's right. You can dunk those vegetables in ketchup and cheese all you want to, my man. Larry Enticer. He's just gonna send it. That's right. That sounds like an interesting name to me. There is the Squatchy Ink Man. That's right. Your old pal Wes. Start to look for some Squatchy stickers coming from the man pretty soon. Dave Jackson, there he is. He's in the house. Glad to see you. Hope you're feeling well, doing well. Oreo Cream Walks, there she is, sitting right over there in Kansas City, Kansas. Yeah, I thought it was Kansas City, Missouri, but apparently not. Sam Squanchford Barrel coming to us from the Sunshine State. How you doing there, sir? Mr. Rod Dupree coming to us from the skiing areas of Colorado. Hello there, sir. Glad you're out there. Cheryl Willens in the house. Oh, Danny boy, finally made it to a live show. Glad you are here, sir. Let's see here. We've got a whole lot more than this. There's Miss Natalie Smith. I'm glad she's hanging out with us. Lance Windsor, there's the man, the myth, the legend himself. Hey, if y'all are up in his area of Canada, that man needs some squatching partners. Y'all need to get together. Obsidian Radio. Hey, hi. Hello there. Hi there. Bob there. Hey there. Hi there. Bob there. That's right. Natalie Smith, I said hi to you. I know. Let's see here. There's more people in this. Ken. I'm sorry. It just feels like Japanese for some reason. Concho. The insiders know what concho means. If you don't know what concho is, just Google concho and Japan, and you'll figure it out real fast. Dink Cooper, our quasi-scientist, of course, is checking in with us, swinging his tool. Spike Jeff, hello, back at you, sir. Glad you are with us as well. I am getting to the bottom. No, I'm not. I thought I was, but I am not. There is Georgia Rebel. What's up with y'all back, man? Glad you is with us as well. I love Georgia. Georgia is one of my favorite southern states. It really is a fine place. Savannah is an awful nice place. I do like Savannah. There are some very lovely places. Atlanta, yeah, I've been to Atlanta, not so much, but yeah, Savannah is a very, very nice place. Glad you were with us. Let's see here. All of you can kiss my rebel. Reverend Matthew Gaines is checking in the house. How you doing, Reverend? Reverend. There's a whole bunch of reverends in here. Let's see here. Yep, click. I know it's so annoying when I do that. I try not to. There, Crusader Kid. There you are. I'm here. You're there. Makes it all cool. There's Lee Scott. How you doing? Glad you're with us as well. And we're like halfway through. So if you haven't said hi, you better, because I won't know you're here if you don't. And I don't like to miss people who are hanging out live. That is for sure. We are here Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific. That's right, specifically at Pacific time. Donald Fuller. Well, thank you, sir. We're trying to make it a great show. Boris Kopp. There he is. Mid-June. Don't forget, mid-June, we are going to be camping in the Pi Valley. So get your time off. I will have dates after the first of the year. As soon as the first of the year gets here and I can reserve dates, we are reserving dates. So we will have the dates for the new Matt Lidioff. Hello from California, back at you. That's right. Northern California. I even moved further Northern California. I'm way up in NoCal now. It's a beautiful place up here. It really, really is. I'm happy to be here. There's Don Rife. That's right. The Vikings will get you if you don't watch out. I still need to get together with that guy and go camping because he looks like my kind of guy. Tim McCune, how you doing, sir? Glad you were there. I'm nearly to the bottom. That's almost everybody. There is Jay Gerd. Hey, present. Glad you're here with us, man. All right. All right, here we go, people. If you haven't said hi, I'm going to give you one more opportunity at the end of the show. We are going to pick us one more tonight to make it super creepy, and then we will continue this next week. So what am I going to give you? Am I going to give you a good one, or am I going to give you a crap one? Let's see here. I think I'm going to give you, that's right, The Tale of Junior Spade to wrap this up for the evening. All right, here we go, folks. This is a story that comes out of Arizona. It is very gruesome. If you do have young children around, you probably won't want to keep them around for this one. I'd say this is definitely 13 and up. So just keep that in mind. All right. Well, there's a story that began to circulate around the Mogollon Rim. Camp Geronimo is one of those places that's out there. It's a Boy Scout camp, and it's in a very historic place. Now, the tale of poor Junior Spade and his father Bill, while in the wilds of the Mogollon Rim, building a log cabin, just have several fate-filled events take place. Let's take a listen to his stories. Now, it was in the spring of 1976. My son Junior and I were headed up towards Turkey Springs, Arizona, where I had inherited a small bit of land right on the adjacent to Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. Now, Junior had just turned 12 and was quite the woodsman himself already. Being a Boy Scout, he sure honed his skills in the wild, and why, I'd bet he could do it solo, a week-long packing trip with very little worry from anyone but me, of course. They've taught him very well. He had decided, since his mom had passed away, that we would take this opportunity to start fresh and make a new home and log cabin life, and it sure sounded like the right kind of thing for us. Well, I had ordered the log cabin kit to be brought on site, and we were going to have to do was fell the logs on site and put it together. It should make for an adventure that we'll never forget, just the type of distraction we'd need to heal. Well, I had paid a couple of the locals to clear out a tract of land and stack the trees on one side of the lot for easy pickings, and as well to clear a nice path from the city road to the building lot, some 3/4 of a mile away into the cut. Well, when we arrived, I was pleased to see that the work had all been done, and then, much like cutting a wide path, leaving a best of the trees standing and saving all the old growth I could, I wouldn't have been able to have cut a better path myself. It was nearly perfect. When we arrived at the cleared site for the log cabin, again, the men had a wonderful feeling for the land and only cleared what space was needed to level the earth for the cabin and left all the old growth around the plot. When the forest heals from our little invasion, the scenery should be amazing, as if our little log cabin belonged and wanted to be built right where they had placed the foundation. Junior and I had packed the van with just about everything we had left that we wanted to keep, including our temporary living quarters and old canvas Boy Scout tent. It will keep us dry and warm for the next few months, and we'll get the cabin up and tight from the elements. Junior being 12 will be a big help, but I still needed some adult strength to help out, so I hired a young man named Jake from a nearby town to be my extra back for the time, and we were awaiting his arrival tomorrow. For now, Junior and I would work on setting up the cowboy camp and getting settled in for the night. A change of life is what we wanted, and it looks like it's exactly what we got. Well, the tent went up without much effort, and I was surprised in the fact that I had figured on hours of wrestling with the stupid thing and finding the lines missing. But in fact, 45 minutes later, we were loading the wood in the stove and running the chimney out of the top of the tent. It was amazingly simple. No wonder that's how they did it for all those years. We had to empty the gear from the van into the tent and really began to take shape. A sitting area up near the front of near the stove, and the sleeping area in the back with our cots all comfy and set up. Tomorrow we'll build a latrine and all shall be right with the camp once more. Junior was so tired from the day that he was already falling asleep at the round dinner table, so I helped him off to his bunk and got him off to sleep. I was a bit whipped myself, so I knew it wouldn't be long before I too would be down for the count, so I grabbed my flashlight for an after dark check of the woods to be sure no bears were about. Well, just as I stepped out of the tent, I thought I saw a black figure run off into the dark, but it made no sound, so I really couldn't tell what it was. That part of the lot hadn't been plowed, and the land was quite dry at the moment, so it didn't leave any tracks to follow either. But I figured it would have taken a few nights of us being here before the local wildlife would get used to it and move on to another location. I thought no more of it on the night, and then went back to the tent, closed up and settled in for what some will deserve sleep, as the real work starts tomorrow. It wasn't until very early in the morning that I was awakened by Junior. He had said he had been out to pee, and there was a strange man watching him from the woods. Well, he couldn't see him very good, but his flashlight kept making the eye shine at him. So I grabbed my pistol and a flashlight, and we went to take a look. As we expected, we found no one or nothing, and we searched around for nearly a half an hour. We agreed maybe it was an owl in a tree, and maybe it had just been mistaken. Strange place syndrome must have been what it was, and we went back to sleep. Well, Jake had arrived sometime in the early morning, and when I got up and started the coffee, I heard him call out to us in the tent, "Good morning. I didn't want to wake you," from a strange voice in camp. Well, I swung open the tent flap and invited Jake in for a cup of joe to get the day started. I had noticed that he was entering, that he had brought the outhouse supplies with him from town that I had paid for and ready for pickup to the supply house, and he was eager to get to work on that and had already unloaded the wood in the exact right place alone before we had awoken. Just to put his best foot forward, he seemed like he was a man that we could learn to trust. Now, for the next couple of weeks, work went on uninterrupted. As we had thought, as for the first couple of nights, the weirdness of the new land had gone away, and the animals had accepted our intrusion into the forest and stopped wandering near the tent at night. And Jake and I had made some real progress on the cabin. The walls were up and the windows and doors framed in, and we were on the lookout for just the right trees to fell for the roof. And in just a few more weeks, we could be done. I had Junior do a set of tasks each day, like bring clean water from the creek and put lye on the piling in the outhouse, and mostly things he could handle on his own for half the day. And the other half of the day, he was free to wander the game trails and locate the that the latter would be the treehouse location of his very own. Well, it was fantastic. As each day the sun would go down and Junior would return with new information about the wild food and new locations he had found and visited. For a little while now, he had just been telling us about the bare footprints he'd been finding around the area. Jake went on to tell us about the Native Americans in the area still roam the national forest lands, and they do not wear shoes as many times to track for theirs. But the stories told of a Mongol monster, a Bigfoot, if you will, that wanders the rim territories and does bad things when they cross humans' paths. So to always be vigilant and aware of where he was and how far from home he had wandered. Well, I chalked it up to old Indian stories to keep the young ones in camp at night and keep people from wandering off alone. Well, it wasn't until about a week later when Junior started talking about something following him home. He could never get a glimpse of what it was, but he seemed to be out there, and he could hear a low whistle from just out of sight in the woodline. Well, I suggested Junior stay in camp for a few days, and if it were a cat following him who was thinking about food and a cougar attack would just be the last thing anyone would want, and everyone agreed. We all kind of stayed near camp the next couple of days, and it wasn't until about day 5 when we noticed the first barefoot tracks in camp. Well, Jake had found where someone had walked right into camp, had walked right up to the tent, and the weird part was there didn't seem to be any tracks leading away, as if whoever had gone to the tent just backed away using their original footprints as they came in. The fact that these bare footprints were huge kind of got lost for a few moments as Junior bent down and laid his hand next to one, and we all realized that there was no way this could have been a man. Well, we searched the tent, of course, and there was no one there. Nothing had been disturbed. It just seemed to have vanished, at least for the time being. Well, the weather was moving in, and before long, it being summer, now the rains could set in for a day or two before they could lift. And this has happened to us a couple of times now. Well, Jake had decided to head into town for a couple of days and check on his place, then pick up supplies when the weather broke and rejoin us at camp to get the rest of the roof cut and in place. So it was just me and Junior here now to wait out the weather. We agreed that we wouldn't go anywhere alone since the visitor had come to camp, and it was just about dusk when Junior proclaimed that he had to visit Browntown. So off he went out of the tent. The outhouse was just 20 yards from camp, so we didn't feel the need for me to hold his hand all the time. So he just left the tent flap open so I could see it, and he left it at that. He sprinted like an Olympian to the outhouse, and he was inside before he could even barely get wet. A few minutes had passed, and the outhouse door flew open, and out popped the lighter Junior, who then promptly closed the door and started to sprint back to the tent. But to my horror, he never made it. I thought it was some kind of movie playing out in front of my eyes, but a giant hairy creature emerged from the woodline and intercepted Junior not 5 yards into his run for the tent. It picked him up off of his feet and tore off in a flash into the woods with my boy clutched in its hairy arms. And all the cold hair, all I could hear was Junior screaming off in the distance. It took me a few moments to realize that it was me screaming in horror at what had just happened. I quickly came to my senses, threw on my poncho, grabbed my shotgun, and slid on my boots and ran off in the direction the creature had run. There were deep tracks plowing through the soaked ground, and even more heavy now with my boy in its grasp. I could only imagine Junior kicking and clawing and punching at the creature in an effort to let him down, but he couldn't keep it held for long, or it would end up hurting him. So I knew I had very little time. I followed the tracks as fast as I could, but they covered 2 times the ground, twice as fast as I could. I just couldn't give up. It seemed like forever that my worst thoughts running through my head, my mind of what could be happening to my boy. Then I heard him scream, "Dad, help me!" And I ran out into the direction just as fast as I could manage. Finally, as I came into a very small clearing in a dense part of the woods, there on the ground was Junior, a little worse for wear, but alive. I ran towards him, but only got a few feet when a very large, hairy, covered monster stepped out of the tree lines between us. It appeared to be a female, as there were breast presents, barren of hair. She had wide hips like a woman of married births, 2-inch long hair that got longer at the wrists and ankle and covered her body except for the palms, breasts, face, and the feet, which was all of very reddish dark fur. She was taking possession of the boy, and I had no choice but to aim and fire my shotgun to regain control. I blasted the creature at point blank range as she charged at me, knocking me to the ground and knocking away my shotgun out of the sight and unreachable. She stood over me, bleeding from the chest where the bird shot had broken open the skin very deeply, but not enough to kill her. Junior screamed out again, and she turned to look his way. I pulled out my fixed blade knife from my sheath and stabbed it into her foot, cutting off 2 of the smallest toes from her right foot. She screamed out in terror and reached down and snatched me by the face. The very last thing I remember seeing was her walk over to Junior and stomping on his head with her bloody foot, picking him up and then walking away, just as the warm embrace of unconsciousness washed over me. They said it was Jake that found me in the woods the next day. He had found me at the scene at the camp. He had found the scene at the camp and then followed the tracks to the trail to discover me lying in a pool of my own blood, barely alive. Jake said he couldn't believe I was still breathing and had survived such an attack, seeing as when he found me, my face was hanging on a branch above my body. According to the story, the police and fire rescue, wildlife department, and everyone else you could think of, they searched for poor Junior. His father's injuries were so bad, the man will never again have a normal life. They said that after he healed, he went back to finish his cabin in the woods, and still to this day searches the forest for the 3-toed Mongolian monster and his poor missing son, Junior. Oh, I think that's where we're going to leave it right there for this edition of the Squatchers Lounge podcast. I am so happy all of y'all could join us out here today for this one. Let me check out the live hangout once more and see if anybody showed up late to the party that needs a shout out, and I think we are in pretty good deals. There's AL Eagle. How you doing there, champ? Glad you could join us as well. And that, my friends, is going to be the end of it. I'm so glad you are here. We will continue this next week on Halloween night. That is for sure. There's a Tyrone Green. How you doing there, Tyrone? Glad you joined us tonight as well. And with that, it's time for me to get out of here. Thank you all for being here live. Come back and see us again next Wednesday night. I think it might be a little later next week because it is Trick or Treat night. We might start at 9 p.m. Pacific, but we will find out for sure and post it on Facebook.com/S Lounge Podcast. Have a wonderful night, everybody. And as always, thanks for being here. And may the Squatch be with you.